The Messerschmitt Bf-109 rolled hard left, the pilot's eyes locked on the American P-47 Thunderbolt ahead. Major Klaus Hartmann had 17 kills to his name. He'd been flying combat missions since 1940. He knew every rivet, every weakness, every blind spot of enemy fighters. He squeezed the trigger. Cannon rounds tore through the P-47's left wing. Smoke poured from the engine. The American fighter nosed down, spiraling toward the French countryside below. Hartmann didn't celebrate. He just watched, calculating, counting. That was his third P-47 this week, and it meant absolutely nothing. Because 30 days from now, maybe less, there would be 3 more P-47s to replace them, with fresh American pilots, flying aircraft that rolled off assembly lines faster than Hartmann could shoot them down. The veteran German ace pulled his stick back, climbing back toward the bomber formation he was supposed to be intercepting. His hands were steady. His aim was perfect. His experience was unmatched. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that none of it mattered anymore. Let's back up to understand how the Luftwaffe, the most experienced air force in the world in 1943, came to this devastating realization. The year is 1943. Germany has been at war for 4 years. The Luftwaffe pilots defending the Reich aren't rookies. These are men who learned their trade over Poland, France, the Battle of Britain, and the Eastern Front. They've survived scenarios that would kill lesser pilots in seconds. They know every centimeter of their aircraft. They can identify enemy fighters by sound alone. Major Klaus Hartmann, our composite character based on numerous German pilot accounts, sits in his ready room at a fighter base near Frankfurt. Around him are 11 other pilots. Some are in their early 20s, but fly like men who've lived 3 lifetimes. Others are teenagers with 100 missions under their belts. They're the best of the best, and they're losing. Not because of skill, not because of courage, not even because of tactics. They're losing because of arithmetic. Here's what the Luftwaffe intelligence officers were reporting to their pilots by mid-1943. The United States was producing 1 P-47 Thunderbolt every 90 minutes. Not every day. Every 90 minutes. By the time you ate breakfast, flew a mission, and returned to base, another American fighter had been built, painted, and prepared for shipping. The Republic Aviation factory in Farmingdale, New York, operated 3 shifts. The workers, many of them women who'd never set foot in a factory before Pearl Harbor, assembled these 7-ton fighters with assembly line precision that would have impressed Henry Ford. Each P-47 Thunderbolt weighed 17,500 pounds, fully loaded. It cost the U.S. Army Air Force $85,000, roughly $1.5 million in today's money. The American government's response to this price tag? Build more, faster. By comparison, Germany was producing roughly 40 fighters per day across all types. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf FW-190s. They were excellent aircraft. In a straight fight, either could match a P-47. But there weren't enough of them, and the gap was widening. But the production numbers weren't even the worst part for the Luftwaffe pilots. The Americans had implemented something the Germans hadn't seen before. A systematic replacement pipeline that treated aircraft and pilots like interchangeable parts in a vast machine. Here's how it worked. When an American P-47 pilot got shot down over Europe, the U.S. Army Air Force immediately began a 30-day process. A replacement pilot, already trained at bases in the United States, received orders. A replacement aircraft, already built and tested, got loaded onto a transport ship or flew via the northern ferry route. 30 days, like clockwork, sometimes faster. The American pilot Hartmann shot down that morning. He'd been flying for 6 weeks. His aircraft had 82 flight hours on it. Fresh paint, fresh engine, fresh ammunition. Hartmann's Bf-109 was on its 447th combat sortie, the same airframe, patched, repaired, cannibalized from other damaged fighters. Some of the aluminum panels on the wings came from 3 different aircraft. The engine had been rebuilt twice. The radio worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays if you kicked it right. Hartmann himself had been flying combat missions for 3 years without a break. No rotation home, no extended leave, just mission after mission after mission. The Americans rotated their pilots after 25 to 30 missions, then sent them home to train new pilots, then brought in fresh replacements who'd never seen combat but had 300 training hours in aircraft identical to what they'd fly in combat. Captain Ernst Weber sat in the intelligence briefing room, staring at the charts his commanding officer had pinned to the wall. "Gentlemen," the major said, "we need to discuss the implications of these numbers." The charts showed American fighter production, pilot training capacity, replacement rates, all sourced from signals intelligence, captured documents, and observation. One chart showed a single number that made Weber's stomach drop: 17,000. That was how many P-47 Thunderbolts the Americans planned to build. Not total fighters, just P-47s. Just one model. Another chart showed Luftwaffe fighter losses versus replacement capacity. The lines crossed in March 1943. After that point, German losses exceeded German production. The gap grew wider each month. "What this means," the major continued, "is that we cannot win a war of attrition. Every American pilot we shoot down gets replaced within 30 days. Every American aircraft we destroy gets replaced within 30 days. They can sustain losses that would cripple any other air force. They can afford to trade 3 or 4 of theirs for every one of ours." He paused. "And eventually, that exchange rate will destroy us." Weber raised his hand. "Sir, what if we increase our kill ratio? Make it cost them more?" The major smiled sadly. "Captain, even if every German pilot became an ace overnight, even if we shot down 5 Americans for every loss, the mathematics don't change. They'll still be producing fighters faster than we can shoot them down." This realization didn't happen overnight. It crept into the Luftwaffe's consciousness through accumulated observations, small revelations, and gradually dawning horror. Hartmann noticed it first in the aircraft themselves. The P-47 he shot down in January had worn paint, combat repairs, oil streaks from a leaky engine, the marks of a fighter that had flown dozens of missions. The P-47s he engaged in June looked like they'd been delivered yesterday, because many of them had been. Then he noticed the radio chatter. American pilots made mistakes that veteran pilots wouldn't make. They flew too tight in formation. They didn't check their 6 enough. They sometimes panicked under pressure, but there were always more of them. He shot down a P-47 with tail number 428066 over Schweinfurt. 2 weeks later, he encountered 428067, 428068, and 428069 in the same engagement. Sequential serial numbers. Brand new aircraft, all delivered within days of each other. The Americans were shipping fighters to Europe in batches like they were delivering mail. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe's entire tactical doctrine began to shift in response to this reality. Before, German pilots fought to win. They engaged American fighters, trying to shoot them down, protect their bombers from reaching targets. Now, they fought to survive. Experienced pilots like Hartmann started teaching younger pilots a different calculus. Don't commit to extended dogfights with P-47s. Hit and run. Preserve the aircraft. Preserve yourself. Why? Because that P-47 you just spent 10 minutes chasing, burning precious fuel, risking your life to shoot down, it'll be replaced in 30 days. But you? If you get killed, you're not getting replaced. Germany doesn't have enough experienced pilots to replace its losses anymore. Your Bf-109? If it gets shot down, the replacement might take 3 months, if there's a replacement at all. The strategic calculus became brutally simple. Every minute spent fighting an American fighter was a minute you weren't fighting American bombers. And the bombers were the actual threat, destroying German factories, refineries, and cities. The fighters, they were just an infinite renewable resource protecting the bombers. Hartmann sat in his cockpit before a morning mission in August 1943. Around him, 11 other fighters were starting their engines. 2 of the pilots had fewer than 20 combat missions. One had never fired his guns at an enemy aircraft. 6 months ago, this gruppe would have had veterans in every cockpit. He checked his fuel gauge. Enough for 90 minutes of flight time. Maybe 2 hours if he was conservative. The Americans. Their P-47s had enough fuel to fly to Berlin and back. If they carried drop tanks, they could loiter over the target for an hour and still make it home. The radio crackled. American bomber formations were approaching. Probably 200 B-17s, maybe more, each one protected by dozens of P-47s. Hartmann did the math automatically now. Didn't even think about it anymore. He had 1 aircraft. If he got shot down, it might not get replaced. The Americans had thousands. They'd replace any losses by next month. He had enough ammunition for maybe 3 or 4 kills, if his aim was perfect, if he got lucky. The American bomber formation had enough gunners that even if every single one missed, the sheer volume of defensive fire made attacking suicidal. He had 90 minutes of fuel. The Americans could stay over the target as long as they wanted. The numbers didn't lie. The realization hit different pilots at different times. For some, it was seeing the same American tail number, the identification painted on each aircraft, show up again and again, because the Americans had built so many fighters they were reusing number sequences. For others, it was returning from a mission where they'd shot down 2 or 3 American fighters only to encounter more P-47s the next day. And the day after that, an endless stream. For Hartmann, it was simpler. He was conducting a training flight with a new pilot in September 1943. The kid was 18, barely shaved, 60 hours of training before being thrust into combat. "Sir," the kid asked over the radio, "what's the secret to surviving against the Americans?" Hartmann thought about all the tactical advice he could give. Energy management, situational awareness, deflection shooting, all the hard-won lessons from 3 years of combat. But he told the truth instead. Don't try to win. Just try to make it back. The kid was quiet for a moment. "But don't we need to stop them?" "We can't stop them," Hartmann replied. "We can only delay them, make it expensive, make it take longer." "But stop them?" He shook his head, even though the kid couldn't see it. "They'll replace any losses we inflict faster than we can inflict them." By the end of 1943, the Luftwaffe's leadership understood what their pilots had been learning in the sky. The war had become a contest between American industrial capacity and German military skill. And industrial capacity was winning. Every advantage the Luftwaffe possessed, better training, more experience, sometimes superior tactics, was being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The Americans could afford to lose aircraft, could afford to lose pilots, could afford to make mistakes and learn from them. Because behind every loss was a replacement pipeline that operated with mechanical efficiency. Germany couldn't afford any of those things. Every experienced pilot lost was irreplaceable. Every fighter destroyed created a gap that grew wider as German production struggled to keep up with combat losses. The Luftwaffe had roughly 1,500 fighters available for defense of the Reich in late 1943. The U.S. Army Air Force had over 5,000 fighters in Europe, and more arriving every month. Major Klaus Hartmann flew his last combat mission in December 1943. Not because he was killed, not because he was wounded, because there was no fuel. The American bombers had been targeting German synthetic fuel plants. The Luftwaffe's fuel supplies were dwindling. Even when aircraft were available, even when pilots were ready, missions got canceled because there wasn't enough fuel to fly them. Hartmann sat in his ready room, watching transport trucks deliver fuel barrels, counting them, doing the mental math of how many sorties those barrels represented. Not enough. Never enough. Meanwhile, American P-47s flew overhead. They weren't even bothering to engage anymore, just orbiting, protecting their bombers, knowing the Luftwaffe couldn't afford to contest them. The Americans had learned the same lesson from the opposite side. Why risk losing aircraft in dogfights when you can just ignore the German fighters? They're running out of fuel anyway, out of ammunition, out of parts, out of pilots. Just wait them out. The story of the Luftwaffe's realization about American replacement capacity isn't really about aircraft or even warfare. It's about the collision between skill and scale. The German pilots were right. They were more experienced, better trained. In many cases, they were flying better aircraft on a technical level. But they were fighting an opponent that had transformed warfare into an industrial process. The Americans didn't need every pilot to be exceptional. They needed enough pilots to overwhelm through numbers. They didn't need every aircraft to be perfect. They needed enough aircraft to be everywhere simultaneously. This was the first war where industrial capacity mattered more than martial prowess, where the factory floor determined outcomes more than the battlefield. The Luftwaffe pilots learned this lesson in the most brutal way possible. By winning individual battles, but losing the war. By shooting down American fighters only to face more the next day. By surviving impossible odds only to realize that survival itself didn't matter because the strategic mathematics were already decided. So here's what makes this story worth remembering. Those Luftwaffe pilots didn't stop fighting. They knew the math. They understood the industrial disparity. They realized that every tactical victory was strategically meaningless. But they kept flying. Hartmann kept climbing into his patched-together Bf-109. Kept flying against impossible odds. Kept teaching new pilots how to survive, even though he knew survival was becoming increasingly unlikely. Why? Was it loyalty, pride, duty, denial? Or was it something else? The recognition that once you've started something, once you've committed, the mathematics of victory become irrelevant to the personal calculus of honor. The Luftwaffe pilots stopped trying to win the war, but they never stopped trying to do their jobs, even when those jobs became impossible, even when every mission was a reminder of industrial inadequacy, even when they knew that the P-47 they shot down today would be replaced by 3 more tomorrow. They kept fighting because that's what pilots do. The tragedy wasn't that they lost. The tragedy was knowing they would lose months or years before the war actually ended. Flying every mission with the certain knowledge that it changed nothing. That the replacement P-47s were already being built. That the replacement pilots were already training. That the war had already been decided by forces beyond their control. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes courage means fighting anyway. Not because you'll win, not because it matters strategically, but because giving up is worse than losing slowly. What would you have done?